Okay. Thank you all for coming today. I'm Elliot Margulies, and I am pretty certain that nearly everyone in this room has a parent or an ancestor, or maybe you yourself, that made a huge decision and took a huge risk and started a new life in this country. Uh, some of the people that have come here have been escaping dire poverty. Others were fleeing civil wars, like even today's refugees from Syria and South Sudan. And others are escaping persecution for their religious beliefs or the color of their skin. And I'm willing to bet on a bad day for these new immigrants, they felt utterly helpless because most of them probably didn't know English. And most of them probably didn't have a job waiting for them here. And most of them probably didn't have much money when they got here to start out with. But they held on to their dreams. And over time, sometimes generations of their family, they made a new life. And we're here today as proof of that. Today, you're going to hear stories from 5 young people whose parents took a big risk on behalf of the families and crossed the border without papers. They came over as children. And they're called the Dreamers. The Dreamers are named after the DREAM Act that has narrowly been voted down several times in Congress since it was first introduced in 2001. And certainly, as you're going to discover pretty soon, each one of them is very much a dreamer. They dream about leading a productive life and contributing great things to our community at large. They dream about becoming citizens in the land where they've grown up. And certainly, each one is very much a dreamer, but it's a complicated term because it separates them from their parents who are undocumented, and in every way they're dreamers as well. But if a DREAM Act ever passes, it's going to protect the young people, but it's going to leave their parents unprotected. So it's a mixed blessing to be a dreamer. They are definitely not so comfortable. I just did a check. Every one of them has butterflies in their stomach, sweaty palms. I think I hear them mentally reviewing their stories as I'm up here. So I'm really glad that you can make them feel comfortable when they're up here. Think of them as your neighbors, and they're letting you in to some of their most vulnerable feelings and thoughts. They're also uncomfortable because ever since Donald Trump became our president, they're only one bad day away, one volatile hour away from a new executive order that could reverse the executive order that President Obama put in place that's called DACA. And DACA in 2012 enabled them for the first time to have jobs that they could get paid and to be protected from deportation. But all that work, it looks pretty flimsy these days. And already there's been 3 dreamers, maybe more that I'm not aware of, that have been arrested, 1 deported. So it's a day that when we're here today and they're able to share their stories and we're able to bear witness to them, it's important on numerous levels. Even before Donald Trump became president, though, when you meet dreamers, you realize they've been carrying a heavy secret all their lives. And whether they heard it directly or they got it indirectly, they knew, don't tell anyone you're undocumented. It could ruin things for our whole family. And that's a big weight to grow up with. So I am glad for whatever level of healing happens in this room. I do want to thank those agencies that made it possible for us to put this on: California Humanities, SurveyMonkey, and the Acton Family Fund. And I want to thank the vendors that are listed on your programs. And I want to just tell you a couple of words about the Media Center. The Media Center is a place where any one of you can take some classes and use this studio or cameras that we have to make videos that matter to you. So check the website and don't be a stranger. About 3 years ago, we started gathering immigration stories to the United States from every era of our history. And if actually, are there anybody in this room who's contributed a story on our archive? Raise your hand. You can see we got a fair amount of stories that are represented here. And we are very honored when somebody's willing to share some information about how their family got here. So if you're willing to do that, we have a sign-up sheet on the reception table, and stop on your way out. There's also some literature about bills that are currently in the legislature and one in Congress that you might be interested in, and some information about being prepared relative to ICE. Okay, I do want to acknowledge that our newly elected Assembly member, Mark Berman, came today. And gosh, we really are glad you're bearing witness to these stories, because they're going to humanize the bills you'll be voting on. So thank you very much. Grab a seat. And this would have been about one of my favorite parts of the morning, of the day, because I would get to introduce our mentor and somebody who's helped coach all of the storytellers, and that's Francisco Jimenez, the author. But personal matters have kept him away, and he's really sorry. He extended a lot of regrets to you guys. And he sent a short statement. So I thought one of our storytellers, Sarai, will come up and read his statement.
When I was 4 years old, my family left Mexico and crossed the U.S.-Mexican border without authorization. We immigrated to the United States to escape poverty and to seek new and better life. We led with a hard life, filled with strenuous work, stress, and anxiety about finding work and being caught by La Migra, the border patrol. I lived in constant fear for 10 long years. When I was in 8th grade, we were deported back to Mexico, but thanks to Ito, our Japanese sharecropper, for whom we picked strawberries, who sponsored us, we later returned to the United States with authorization. It is not surprising that I welcome the opportunity to work with Elliot, and on this important and timely event, it has been a privilege and joy. Like my other dreamers, this successful and inspiring dreamers whose stories you are about to hear have already been valuable contributions to their communities and to our society. It is truly unfortunate that our government has lacked the political will to enact legislation that would permit our nation to benefit fully of the intelligence, talent, and ingenuity and perseverance of this new generation of immigrants.
It's my pleasure to introduce our first storyteller, which Francisco would have done. I should have mentioned, if you haven't read any of his memoirs, grab one out of the library, because they're riveting, and he's so heartfelt, and he showed us all some of the tricks that go into the writing. They're not really tricks, because he ends up crying as he tells them to us, but he inspired all of us. But Sarai is an inspiration for all of us as well. And she's a resident of East Palo Alto with her husband and her 17-month-old daughter, who I don't know if she's here today.
They had lunch.
They had lunch. Well, that was being here. So she's the founder and the CEO of an app called Dreamers Roadmap. It's a mobile app that helps undocumented students find scholarships for college. Her passion is to connect people to information they need to make them happy and successful. So turning it over to you.
Thank you. So I first just wanted to thank Elliot and Francisco and the Media Center for the opportunity to give us this space where we can feel safe and not be judged for what we've lived and gone through, but feel supported 100%. So thank you very much. All right. So as Elliot said, I'm going to look at all of you. Take a deep breath. As though an earthquake left a deep crack in the earth, there's a dividing line in my story. It's 2006, and my mom returns to Mexico. I am 16. To this point, my mother and I had been inseparable. We had even shared a bed together. And we also shared a lot of tears, being that there was always uncertainty and instability in our lives. But she always had the right scripture and the right hymn to sing to me to make me feel better. When she left, I had no idea that I was not going to see her for another 10 years. She left because one of my sisters, who was a citizen, was told that if my mom left to Mexico, she would return in 6 months. This ended up being faulty advice, and I didn't see her for 10 years. It was the hardest decision of my life to stay behind because she asked me to go with her. I decided to stay because my only avenue to stability was an education. I'm the youngest of 11 children and the first one to go to high school and graduate and had the dream and the vision of going to college. And I had seen other people in my community who constantly said, just do good in school and you can go to college and have a career and you can buy a house and you can buy a car. And I wanted that for my mother and myself. Being that since I was 4 years old, we had just been bouncing around from one house to another because we had to live with a sibling, whoever had space for us. And this brought tension to the house because having 2 extra mouths to feed was not something that they had planned. So this brought a lot of tension even between my mom and I, because I would remember we would be here in Redwood City and I would cry to her because my brother-in-law would constantly tell me that I was worthless, that I was never going to be anything in my life. And despite the fact that my mom would do all the child care and housekeeping, they treated her like a servant and not a family member. And being so young and seeing this really traumatized me. And I didn't want that for the rest of my life. I didn't want that for her, and I didn't want that for me. So my only pathway was a higher education. So I told her, I can't, Amma. I need to stay. I need to stay for me, and I need to stay for you. My senior year of high school, I applied for FAFSA like everybody else. And it turns out that I didn't qualify because I was undocumented. I didn't have a social security number, therefore I couldn't complete my application, and I couldn't get financial aid to go to college. I went up to my counselor and I told her my situation. I said, I've done everything I've been asked to do. I've been involved in my community. I have amazing grades. I'm very involved on campus. But the government says that they can't help me. Can you help me? She says, come back in a week and I'll let you know if I find anything. I come back in a week and I go into her office. My heart is pumping 110 times the normal speed because this is about to define my future and the future of my mom. She sits me down and she says, I found one scholarship. She obviously didn't look into it. It had the word Hispanic in it and she assumed that it was for me. This scholarship also required me to be a U.S. resident or a citizen. Therefore, there was nothing left. She said, this is going to be the scholarship for you. And if this doesn't work out, I'm sorry. College is just not something for you to go through right now. When she said those words, all I could see at a far distance was my mom. It had been 3 years already since I had not seen her. And that reason and that purpose why I stayed behind was no longer valid. The day of graduation, I didn't want to get up from my seat. I didn't want to walk the stage because all I saw at the end of that stage was a barrier, a block at the end of that stage that said, "This is it. This is as far as your road goes." And I wish that to nobody. Being that we came here as children and America is the only place we know as home, and to have that block at the end of high school and hearing all these things as a child, do good and you can go to college, and at the end not be true, was heartbreaking. I moved back to East Palo Alto, and it wasn't until I went to church and a very stubborn sister told me, why wasn't I going to college? What was I going to do with my life? And it was still something very difficult for me to talk about because I knew that college wasn't an option for me. I eventually opened up and I told her my situation, and she said, "You can go to college." And then it took me a little bit to kind of digest what she had just said, because I thought to myself, how can this lady who's from my church know more than my counselor who's expected to know everything? She eventually put me in touch with her son at De Anza College, who took me to the first gala. It's called the Bay Area Gardeners Foundation, where they were giving scholarships to just undocumented students. And that changed my life. I saw hope again. That tunnel was no longer dark. I saw a little light at the end, and it was a glimpse of hope. I went to college that same fall that I graduated at Foothill, but the unexpected happened in 2009. My father was diagnosed with cancer. School became something that I couldn't really handle anymore. I had always been a good student, but after he got diagnosed with cancer, my grades was just starting to slip. I couldn't concentrate. I eventually dropped out of college. My father passed away in 2011, and it was a year shy from DACA, which allowed us to have, as Elliot mentioned, a permit to be here with safety from deportation, but also gave us opportunity to leave to our countries for humanitarian reasons. I, again, was not able to travel to Mexico to see my dad alive for the last time. Nor was I able to go to his funeral, to be there to support my mom through my father's loss. And again, I wish that to no one. Many times I thought, did I do something wrong? What have I done to deserve so much pain? And to this day, I still don't know. I still don't know if I did something wrong and why I had to go through all of that. But a year later, President Obama passed DACA, and I applied. I was able to go back to school. I started getting involved with technology. I had no idea how to code, but I applied for hackathons anyway. And that's what ignited a fire in me to see that technology can solve problems. In 2014, I applied for a competition called Voto Latino Innovators Challenge, which was open to anybody in the country who had a solution to a problem in their community. And I decided to create an app, to pitch it, not create it, because it was still like a thought just in my mind. So I said, okay, wouldn't it be great if there was an app that would help students find scholarships to go to college, and that they know that they have money available for them to go? Because when I was in high school, I didn't have that opportunity, or my counselors didn't have that knowledge. So what if we built this? I went to the competition and I was lucky to win first place. And I came back with $100,000 to create Dreamers Roadmap. So for all the techie, non-techie people in the room, you can definitely create an app if you have a good idea and a good story behind the reason why you want to create it. But in 2015, June 2015, I finally got my green card. My mom was still in Mexico. I was here. And I remember the day that I got it. It was my brother-in-law's birthday, and my husband got this really hot pink bag, and I'm like, oh my goodness, what prank is he gonna pull to his brother? Then he brings the bag to me and he's like, this is for you. I'm like, I don't want to open it. Something's gonna pop out of that bag. Like, I have no idea. And I open the bag and there's a yellow envelope. I pull out the paper and there it is. A plastic, silverish, greenish card with my picture. And at this point, I think I was like 7 months pregnant. So all I do is like hold my belly, and I started crying because all I saw in that picture was my mom. I'm like, okay, like this is it. Like there's nothing else holding me back. Like we're going. And I was pretty pregnant. I probably shouldn't have driven that much. And it was, I think, 13-hour drive. Like my hands were really sweaty. I would put up the window and then put it down, turn on the AC, then turn it off. And I was just thinking, like, I'm finally gonna see her. Like, is she still alive? Like, even those thoughts would come to my mind. Like, is it really gonna be her? And we crossed the border. And again, my heart was pumping despite the fact that I was crossing legally. And I wasn't even coming back yet. I was just going to Mexico. And we pull up to the store, and there she was. My mom with a little bit more like grayish hair. She's 70 something now, but she's held her posture very well. She looks great. And she looked exactly the same from when I last saw her. And here I am, everybody gets out, and I'm in the front seat and kind of taking a breather. I open the door, and with my big belly, I get off as careful as I can, and I just run to her. We both open arms, and we hug, and we cry, and we both shed tears of joy because for so many years, we hadn't been able to do that. I could now touch her silky hair. I could touch her face, and it was really her. Like, I did that to her quite a couple times just to make sure that she was real. And it was a beautiful feeling. And I felt very blessed to be able to have that opportunity to see her again and alive. And despite the fact that she's still not back with us, that is my ultimate dream. I continue to dream to have her with me because now I'm married. I have a 17-month-old baby. I rent this place in East Palo Alto, which is not all the way up there yet, but I want her back with me. So that is my dream, to be able to bring her back and be able to be the grandma to Eliana that I want her to be, as she was to all my other nieces and nephews. And thank you so much. That is my story. Oh, God.
So our next storyteller is Orlando Pineda, and he is currently a computer programmer. He codes for good at a nonprofit startup and helps others in need by developing innovative technologies that challenge poverty. Orlando earned a BS in computer science from Columbia University in New York, which is where Francisco went as well, and they discovered that when we all met, from the School of Engineering. Outside of work, Orlando enjoys going on hikes with his dog, Nata, and he owns and has seen every, another pronunciation. Francisco is going to do these. He owns and has seen every Studio Ghibli film. What is that? And hopes to continue this trend with any future releases. So he has never performed in front. I mean, this is a coder, so give him all the warmth in your hearts, because he's a brave coder.
Hi, everyone. I think I'm just going to jump right in. So it was my sophomore year at Columbia University, and I was struggling. I knew college would be difficult, but I never thought I would go that many nights without sleep. I mean, why should I struggle this hard when my future was in chains? Why was my future in chains? Well, I was undocumented. I was an undocumented student attending one of the most prestigious universities in the world, which meant that come graduation, despite having a fancy and expensive degree, I wouldn't be able to do anything with it. As time passed and graduation came closer, it became harder and harder to convince myself that this was all worth it. That is, until something amazing happened. The DREAM Act was up for vote in the Senate, an act that would unchain my future and provide me with a path towards citizenship. Obviously, I became excited. I began to dream and fantasize about all the things I would do once the DREAM Act was in place. I would get my first job in my field of study. I would buy and drive my first car. I would be able to go home and visit my family for the first time in Mexico. The possibilities seemed endless. In hindsight, I should have known not to get too excited. I guess, in my mind, it was a no-brainer. They had to pass the DREAM Act. How could they not? How could they destroy the dreams and futures of me and my family? But they did just that. They destroyed it. Everything. The cloud I had been dreaming on suddenly faded. And as they let the DREAM Act die in the Senate, so had my dreams. I came crashing back to earth, back to reality. But as I fell, instead of landing back on the surface to normality, it broke. I broke. And when I landed, it was pitch black. Things shouldn't have been different. Things were just like before, right? But they weren't. I wasn't. Light wasn't penetrating this far. I was in a dark place, a place I would spend the next long years of my life in. In my culture, we don't really acknowledge depression. But from what I know now, this is exactly where I had landed. My grades dropped. My motivation dropped. I suddenly became a hermit-like robot that would hide from the world. I suddenly became a hermit-like robot that would only do the minimum in school, social, and work. I suddenly became a hermit-like robot that would hide from the world in shame at every opportunity. Shame. I felt unwanted, like I didn't belong there, or anywhere else in this country. It brought back thoughts and experiences that I had when first arriving to college. Thoughts and experiences that I had kind of shoved off when they happened. But looking at them in this new state of darkness caused me great pain and nurtured the flames of negativity in which I was burning. It became immediately apparent that I was different from a lot of the student body when I first arrived to Columbia. During orientation, we were asked about what we did that past summer. I stared in awe and amazement as these students described vacations and trips to parts of the world that I could only dream of visiting. In hindsight, it might have just been my mind romanticizing what these trips were really like. But in that moment, these people's horizon seemed so broadened that I felt belittled saying that I had spent the summer on campus, something that I thought was really cool. I remember a time when I got made fun of for the clothes I was wearing. I walked into the late night basement cafeteria and ran into some acquaintances from some of my classes. "Panda, what the hell are you wearing?" I just shrugged and didn't answer because I really didn't know how. I was wearing the same clothes I had worn throughout all of high school, which I had no problem with, but apparently to these individuals, they were subpar. At the time, it didn't affect me, but these memories in new darkness brought me great pain. I realized my reality was different. during a conversation I had with the people on my dorm. The floor I lived on the first 2 years at Columbia was a floor full of engineering majors. Since we were all in engineering, we all had these really expensive books we all needed to buy, and we often complained about that to one another. Since my scholarship program enabled me to check out these books long term, I felt proud and wanted to share this with them. But when they asked what program that was, I told them that I had a scholarship that covered everything from books to flights. One of the older students responded with, "You realize my parents are paying for your tuition?" Confused, I asked, "How does that work?" He proudly responded, "Both my parents are paying for my tuition in full." "Great," I responded, at a loss for words. The only reason I was in this program was because my parents couldn't contribute anything towards my tuition. Through sheer merit and necessity, I had obtained an incredible scholarship, one that I will always be grateful for. But in that moment, I felt like a second-rate student, handicapped by my socioeconomic background. I never brought up the fact that I was in that program ever again. And so I continued to live in this darkness, even past graduation, even after the arrival of DACA, which would finally allow me to do two things I've always wanted to do: drive and work. Naturally, my family began to worry about me. My mom justified this robotic state as me recovering from the difficulties of school, but I could tell that she was worried. The turning point was when I was sitting in the office of my high school's alumni coordinator. She looked at me with a sense of worry and bewilderment. "Your degree is starting to stale. I don't understand. Are you actually trying?" No, I wasn't. In that state, I wasn't exactly knocking down doors to get the interviews and do my best to excel in them. Every company I applied to was the same, and as the rejection letters started to accumulate, it became harder and harder to motivate myself to even try to reach out. That was until she sent me an opening for a software engineer at a nonprofit tech startup. Huh, that's different, I thought to myself. I applied, and to my surprise, I got an interview. I decided to give it one last shot and summon the last drops of motivation to prepare for the barrage of interviews that were to come. 3 interviews later, I had done it. I made it all the way to the last round, in which I would speak to the CEO of the company. He started the conversation with, "Let me tell you my story about why I started One Degree. You see, I grew up undocumented." Huh. I couldn't stop myself and blurted out, "Really?" A spark. I had a mini freak out inside of my head. Did that come out as weird? Did he think I was judging him for being undocumented? I wish I could have seen the look on my face. Oh, how ironic it would have been to come this far and fail for reacting like that. As he continued his story, I felt different. I didn't know what it was. That spark. Something had ignited. And all of a sudden, I had this insatiable urge to tell this person that I was undocumented too. Something that I had never felt before in my life. And so I told him, and it was amazing. For that brief moment, I was my old self again. The rest of the interview was a blur, but I ended up getting the job. But I didn't just get a job. I gained so much more. I left with a spark, a ray of light that would lead me out of that darkness. And as I finally stepped out of that darkness and realized something that I should have realized all along, which was that there should be no shame in one's struggle. In fact, it should be a source of strength, a source of pride. As undocumented people, we have to work so much harder to even reach the surface that everyone else is already standing on from birth. Through merit and tenacity and the help of our champions, we are capable of accomplishing amazing feats, such as graduating from Columbia and even becoming a software engineer. And with today's broken and unforgiving political climate, there are many, myself included, who are being targeted and are vulnerable, in danger of falling to that dark place where I once lived, or worse. And we simply cannot let that happen. Thank you.
Our next storyteller is our youngest storyteller, Miriam Leon. And the first time I met her, she was like bubbling over with excitement about the comparison of Raisin in the Sun, a play she was reading in school, with a Greek play called Antigone that I didn't tell her I hadn't even read. She's full of enthusiasm for life and learning. She has, a lot on her plate, and what she wrote here is she's a sophomore at Sequoia High School. She's an active member of the Dream Club there, and I should tell you there's the person who started the Dream Club is in our audience, and she has inspired so many young people. I'm so honored to have gotten to know Jane Slater. And in addition of that, she's a member of the Immigrant Youth Action Team, and Miriam loves spending time with her family, who I think are here today, and we're glad you're here, and her dog Rocky, who I don't think is here, right? Okay, Miriam.
So I'm sitting in my ICAP English class, which is like an AP class at any other high school. The classrooms are organized in such a way where our desks are angled at an angle, where you can look at the board and, look at your partner. My partner leans over and says, "Immigrants shouldn't be here. They are a negative weight on us. They aren't positive contributors to our community." While he doesn't know I'm undocumented, he does know I'm an active member of Dream Club who advocates for the undocumented youth in our community. He doesn't know this scares me. Whatever he tells me, the way he talks to trigger a reaction out of me, it frightens me. We now have a US president who wants to enforce mass deportation. And although there are a few teachers and many students who have voiced their support for the undocumented youth, there are still people who have a negative voice on us. We even have a Republican that just sprang up out of all of a sudden after the elections. Since that day in English class, I haven't been the same around him. While we sit a few feet apart from each other, there's a great division between us. I'd wonder if he makes those comments if he knew me better. I wonder if he'd feel the same way if he knew how hard my parents worked. My father, he works 2 jobs. He works by day as a tile installer, and by night he goes and works as a janitor. My brother, he also works with my dad during the day, and in the evenings he'll go to college hoping to become a firefighter one day. My mom, she's a full-time mother by day and goes to work at night, almost not having sleep. I normally take care of my siblings when I come home. I come home and I fix them up whatever we have on the stove and make sure they eat. And then I go with them and sit them down so that they can do their homework. And Most often, they'll listen to me, but there are sometimes that they'll tell me, "You're not my mom." And I mean, I get it. Um, After they finally did whatever they had to do, I put them to bed, and that's when I have time to study and do my homework. This is around 10. So I don't finish. In the mornings, I get up at 6 so I can go get a ride from my dad to school. I arrive an hour before school starts, and I go into a classroom, which was a college readiness class taught by Mr. Stalder. And I finish my homework there where I can finally get some peace and quiet. For a while, we lived in an apartment that was right in front of my school, Sequoia in Redwood City. It was a big apartment, it's bigger than the house I live in now. And it was so clean and had roads, and there was even a tree in front of our apartment where I could climb, and I had such a great time there. And I never had to worry about the things I had to worry about now. We now live in East Palo Alto where it's really crowded. My streets are dirt roads, and there's always music blasting that distracts me and my siblings. It's not somewhere where at first I'd feel safe. It's not somewhere I was used to. And it's definitely not somewhere where I think I can take care of my siblings and me by myself. And it's crowded. I live with 3 other families. And this happens a lot for people in East Palo Alto. There are normally people that have 4 to 5 families living in their house. And this is why the roads get so crowded, because there's cars, crowded with them. I'd wonder if he knew how hard we are trying to be self-sufficient and productive, positive contributors in our community. If he'd only change his mind. The boy in my English class, he's in that new Republican club I've mentioned before. I've seen pictures of his house, and I'd imagine, wow, what it'd be like to live in a house like that. I'd only imagine to have my own room, not have to be crowded and rushing into the bathroom to beat the other people living at my house. I'd imagine he has all the fruits he can wish, all the lucky charms he can have, not having to fight for it because there's more. I bet he goes to restaurants and he doesn't have to worry about the bills. I bet he doesn't have to look at the price before he orders because he knows their parents are fighting every month to give you something. He doesn't worry about taking care of his family or his parents when they grow old, knowing that they won't have any money by then. Not worrying that one day he'll have to care for them because his family won't make it. I don't say anything to him. I don't trust him to know I'm undocumented. I'd feel like he'd invalidate me as a person, as a human being. He probably wouldn't understand me or want to understand me. But like him, I've only grown up in the Bay Area. It's the only place I can call home, whether he thinks it's my home or not. Maybe my assumptions about him are wrong. Maybe he takes care of someone in his family who is sick. Maybe he has experienced death in some way. Maybe he does volunteer work at a charity. Or maybe he has a disease I don't know about. But I can't take my chances. I have to focus on the things that I can do for myself and my family, and keep faith that there's a bright future for us. I have a rigorous and demanding class schedule that demands my focus. Soon I'll be 17 and probably have to get a job to help my family financially. In 2 years, I'll be applying to colleges and scholarships if they are available for me. My goal is to get through law school, and help other immigrants of low-income families. On a deeper level, I want to believe that people are good and have love for us and can see us as people and not be adamant about building walls. I have numerous Caucasian friends. In fact, I convinced 2 of them to join the Dream Club. I know that once you get to know someone, beyond stereotypes, you often find things you have in common and can become friends. But in today's climate, I think that this classmate and mine are not only destined to sit 3 feet away from each other, but a universe apart. Thank you.
Our 4th storyteller is Liliana Campos, and I've known her for a number of years, the longest of all of our storytellers, but she wrote a lot on her bio, so I'm gonna read it. She's a doctoral student, and believe me, it's a miracle she found the time to create a story with the schedule she's told me about. She's getting a PsyD degree at the University of San Francisco. Over the last 8 years, she's worked in an array of settings to support social and emotional health of adolescents and young adults. She was a health educator at Sequoia High School, the same one where Miriam attends, and worked closely with Redwood City's Immigrant Youth Action Team to help raise funds to support undocumented high school youth in their pursuit of higher education. Liliana crossed the border to the U.S. with her family at the age of 7. She was undocumented for 20 years and became eligible for legal permanent residency via a U visa in February of 2017, just a few weeks ago. Her personal experiences as an undocumented woman of color have deeply challenged and shaped her thinking about social and health disparities among underserved and underrepresented communities. Thank you, Lily.
So I'm going to go ahead and read from my paper. I'm going to try as much possible to look at all of your pretty faces. Great. Dear Immigration Officer, I would like to tell you about a dream I had last night. It was a dream about a little girl who loved kindergarten. She did not go to school very often because her mother took her door to door in Mexico City to sell children's books to families. A young mother with a small child probably inspired more people to buy from her. What she remembered the most was how much she wanted to read and color in those books, but could not because each book they sold meant money for food. She wanted to learn to read, and instead, they walked block after block, knocking on doors. On October of 1995, she and her family arrived in California. She was 8 years old. She was exhausted from the family trip, as her mother referred to it. She arrived in a foreign place with new teachers, new food, and a new language. The children's books which now sat at her dining table were for her to read. Her only job was to go to school and get good grades. One day, she found herself walking into her school's auditorium. It was filled with restless children and eager and enthusiastic parents. The principal called her name and hung a medal over her neck that read, Liliana Campos, Student of the Month. She did not quite understand the discussion that followed, so she searched for her mother's eyes in the crowd filled with restless children and eager and enthusiastic parents. Her mother's eyes and hers met for a quick instant, and in that moment, for the first time, they both believed in the American dream. They dreamt about having a happy life in their new home, the United States. They continued to dream. This little girl wanted to learn to read. And with every book she read, page after page, she would continue to dream about the American dream. I woke up suddenly. A shining light entered a corner of my bedroom to touch my face. I was dreading the sun of another day, but hurried into the shower anyway. My mind was lost in the warmth and influence of the water, the overflow of tears of sorrow and pain about this dream. For a minute, I let the water run. I stood in the shower, remembering the smell of the plastic that covered the children's books, the books that were only to be seen. Immigration officer, I was the little girl in the dream. Now, the books that sit on my dining table read Diagnostic Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders, Principles of Psychotherapy, and Culture and Mental Health. I should be grateful for the books that sit on my dining table, but instead, I keep thinking about the dream. The dream lingered in my mind until the sun rested at its highest peak. I noticed the clock ticking like the sun that sheds light into our dreams. And suddenly, the phone rang. Congratulations, your U visa was approved. The phone went mute and my mind went blank. I turned to the shining light in the corner of my bedroom. I lost my breath, and my heart sank as I heard the person on the other side of the phone say, "Congratulations, your U visa was approved. You will now be able to get a green card." I should be thankful, but instead I keep thinking about my dream. My body lost in time, my heart racing faster than the thank you that came out of my mouth. And suddenly, I wake up. I wake up from the American dream, a dream that 11 million undocumented people fight for every day as we open our eyes to keep fighting and surviving the painful and unjust reality of the American dream. I feel a tear roll down my cheek, caressing every single one of the memories that brought me to this moment. Because according to your laws, this visa was only granted due to my brown and undocumented body being abused. And that is, if I have the opportunity and the privilege to survive, then only can I seek the opportunity for my body to be worthy of safety on paper. On paper. You mentioned about my worthy of citizenship and the fact that America recognizes my existence only and if trauma has occurred. But the application I submitted did not include a space for me to talk about the trauma and pain endured by the very same laws that continue to deny my safety and thus continue to perpetuate the violence against my undocumented brothers and sisters. At least, that is what your U visa and acknowledgement represents in my heart. If this is the line towards citizenship that you and others refer to, then I say no thank you. So I ask you on this day, immigration officer, a single day, which may be one of your many days at work, looking at one of the many letters on your desk. What happens next? What do I say to all the remaining dreams out there that have not met your desk nor your eyes, but are being dreamt and spoken about in your country and in your neighborhood? What do I do with the sense of pain and loss that remains despite now having the papers that keep playing with my sense of belonging and who I am? What happens to the other 11 million stories? Immigration officer, listen. Can you hear us? The millions of stories being lived, the 11 million voices. We are speaking. Can you hear us? Can you hear all the young immigrant children dreaming about a happy life in their country? I sometimes wonder about the future of that young girl who walked the streets of Mexico City. I will never know. The challenges I have faced have taught me to persevere, and the world has been my classroom. I no longer walk the streets of Mexico City. Today I walk the streets with my brothers and sisters protesting for our liberation and chanting words like, water is life, Black lives matter, love is love, no ban, no wall, no human is illegal. Because we are here to stay. Unapologetically, one of 11 million. Thank you.
Our final storyteller is Ever Leon, and I'll tell you now that we've left time this time. We had 6 last time we did this. This time we purposely had 5 so that we could have a little bit of time for any questions that you have. So don't leave after Ever. Ever Leon is from Mexico and moved to the U.S. with his family when he was 4. He was raised in the community of Boyle Heights in Los Angeles and attended Santa Clara University. In fact, Ever came to us from Francisco Jimenez, who taught there as well and knew Ever, and knows Ever. He's now been a teacher for the past 10 years, and thanks to DACA, he's excited to pursue even higher dreams. He likes to run, sing, and learn new things, and he is not related to Miriam. So, but welcome, Ever.
Thank you. This process reminds me of a chorus line. He's a director with the dancers and telling you our stories. So here's my turn, stepping into the light. As an undocumented student, I have faced a lot of losses. As you've heard from my fellow companions here, it's just loss after loss. Today I'll be telling you 2 stories of loss. The first one is a personal loss that at some point all of us here, face either right now or in the future or in the past. The loss is about my father. It was winter of 2006, and I was excited to go back to LA with my family to be close with them and be surrounded with a lot of gifts and around the Christmas tree. But also I wanted to go back and see how my dad was really doing. For the longest time, he had been battling cancer of the liver. And we just didn't know what was going to happen with him. So when I went back to LA 2006, I went with my mom and my dad to the hospital. So we enter the room, and that's the usual room that you go into when you go to visit the doctor. There's a gurney, 4 chairs, cabinets, and several medical instruments. And we sat in a circle, and we just waited for the doctor to come in and give us the update. A few minutes later, the doctor came in with his folder, and he joined our cozy circle. Obviously, he saw my parents, and then he asked me if my parents spoke English, and I said no. And at that moment, I became the translator for my parents, as most of us do in this country. So he gave us the updates, and I kept translating that to my parents. And toward the end, he said, "Tell your dad he only has a few months to live." So you can just imagine, it took a lot of courage to say that to a parent. I mean, here you are giving this sad news to the one person that you look up to. Obviously, when that happened, my world just stopped. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't hear anything, and I was frozen. As you can imagine, it took several minutes for me to regain my composure, but I snapped out of it, and I told my dad the bad news. I gave him the news in December of 2006, and then he passed away peacefully in our house on April 11th, 2007. So that's something that I have encountered in terms of a huge personal loss that I'm sure some of you here can relate to that. The second personal loss that I've encountered in my life, obviously there's a lot of losses that I've encountered, but the second one that I want to share with you deals with graduate school. Yes, as Elliot mentioned, I went to Santa Clara University, and I'm forever grateful for that opportunity. But I knew that I wanted to continue with my dreams and to be the best that I can be. So I applied to this fully funded graduate program at a very prestigious Midwestern university. As you know, as you do, you write your personal statement, you get your letters of recommendation, you do your resume, you complete the entire application, you submit it, and then you just wait for the best. So I waited for a few weeks, and I got a letter from the university telling me that I had been selected for their second round, which consisted of an individual interview with the admissions committee. And so that day came for the interview. I walked in, and to my right and to my left, there's other students from Santa Clara that were also selected for the interview process. And I said, oh goodness, here we go. Because all of us were really great, amazing people, and I knew them. And I knew they had excellent grades. I knew they were pretty involved on campus and also off campus. But I said to myself, just relax, take it easy, be yourself, and just answer the questions confidently. My interview came really fast, and I was nervous, I was trembling, my hands were sweating, but I just took it easy, and I answered every question with confidence. I left the room, and I said, okay, well, I just leave it to God and see what happens. On March 14th, 2007, I got a letter from the university telling me congratulations. They had selected me. Later on, I found out that I was the only one from Santa Clara they had selected. And I was very excited. When I got the letter, I was very, very excited for that opportunity to go to graduate school, to continue with my education with a fully funded scholarship. But then I knew that one of the components of the program was to work in the country. So I knew that was going to be a very difficult thing for me to tell the director about my undocumented status. But before I went to the university for orientation, I gave the director a call, and I told him, before you pay for my airplane ticket, I need to really be honest with you, and this is why. So after it took a lot of guts for me to divulge that information to him, because you never know how people are going to perceive you after that. After I said my story to him, he said, well, let me think about what we can do, and I'll give you a call back in a few days. At that same time, that's what my whole thing with my dad happened as well. So I had lost my dad, and then a few days after, the admissions director gave me a call back, and he said, I'm truly sorry, but since you're undocumented, you cannot come. And obviously, I was about to graduate. I wasn't sure what to do, but I knew that I had to be strong, because it's something that, as an undocumented student, you have to go through life and be very, very strong. But at that very moment, I was confused. I didn't know where to go, and I felt hopeless. And the following song that I'll be singing to you, it's really how I felt at that very moment. Where do I go? Follow the river. Where do I go? Follow the ghosts. Where is the something? Where is the someone that tells me why I live and die? Follow the winged song. Follow the thunder. Follow the neon in young lovers' eyes. Down to the gutter. Up to the glitter. Into the city where the truth lies. Where do I go? Follow my heartbeat. Where do I go? Follow my hand. Where will they lead me? And will I ever discover why I live and die? I live and die. Why do I live? Why do I die? Tell me, where do I go? Tell me why. Tell me where. Tell me why. Tell me where. Tell me why. But even though there's a lot of losses as an undocumented student, there's also a lot of happy moments. After that, those two experiences with my loss, I decided to really continue with my life and stay strong. And as many of us know, you have to just cope with that. And we all have a different way of coping with loss and grief. My way of finding my solution to that was to pursue theater. And it was my last quarter of Santa Clara, and I had already taken all my classes, and I had a few space to take an acting class. So there I go to pursue my childhood ambition to be an actor. But as you may know, acting classes are very nerve-wracking, and especially if you're a newbie. But that entire experience really turned my life 360 degrees. I mean, it just completely changed my life. After graduation, I started to audition for several theater companies in the South Bay. So far in my resume, I have a lot of different productions on my resume. Some of them include Rent, Chicago, Spamalot. And the reason why I like theater so much, not only because it really just allowed me to emote these feelings of anger or bliss, and it really took me out of that loss, but it also provided me a safe space where I was able to be free for the first time. Free from being undocumented, free to be myself. No one was there to judge me for who I was, and they accepted me for who I truly was. So that entire experience really was a happy moment for me, and continues to be a very happy moment for me. But looking back in terms of where I am now in my life, I have to thank everyone who has helped me along the way. In high school, I had to tell my counselors that I was undocumented because I really wanted to go to college, and I knew that in order for them to help me, I had to tell them my story. Fortunately, they guided me in the right direction, and Santa Clara at the time offered full scholarships to undocumented students, but you just didn't know. You had to really just find out and just really just do your best. So I applied and I got the scholarship from Santa Clara, and I was truly, very, very excited. But I have to thank my counselors from high school and my mentors for helping me up to that point. When I was in Santa Clara, I met a great group of friends and great professors like Francisco Jimenez that really just continued to inspire me to pursue my dreams. And then in 2012, obviously DACA passed. And after I got the letter with my card that said you're able to work here legally now, I look back and I think, man, like, wouldn't it be nice to have had this way back when I had to go to graduate school? How much different my life would have been. But I still got what I didn't get with a lot of hard work and dedication. Now I teach middle school, and I continue to do service to others, something that Santa Clara taught me, to give back to my community. I would like to leave you with a quote from the song Imagine, because I think it just resonates a lot of compassion and understanding during these times of turmoil. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us, and the world will live as one. Thank you.
Thanks so much for bearing witness. I want to call up all 5 of our storytellers and come on up on the stage. I don't Why can't you be all the Congress people and the senators? We'd be in great shape. I hope that some of you might take this opportunity to ask one or more of the storytellers a question you wonder about them or about anything related to being undocumented or being a dreamer. So if you would stand, there's going to be, Lessa is going to bring a microphone over to you because we want to make that part of the recording.
Thank you so much to all of you. I have both a comment and a question, and it is inspired by your story, Ever. Just in case you don't all know, I think most medical groups and medical centers, I'm a physician, there's a rule that we're not supposed to use family members as translators. So I realize it can be just terrible in that situation, but if you have the ability to do so, you can ask for a translator in most places. Are there other experiences that you have had as in medical care where you would have advice about things that were made you feel bad that you would share to make others' experiences better? That's my question.
Yeah,
Speak to
go
that
ahead.
because I'm getting a PsyD in clinical psychology, so these are discussions that are, definitely I try to advocate in terms of policies and different systemic policies that need to be in place in order to be inclusive and be more aware that, yes, family members and friends can't be used as interpreters or translators. I would say that for me, definitely, I think growing up was, really that was what, that was my experience. You translate for family members and whatnot. My mom currently, she had a car accident a few years ago, and she was on disability for a couple of years. And just, I think the experiences, just hearing her kind of go through the different experiences of navigating these systems, but also just the cultural aspect, right, that comes with not feeling safe and asking for an interpreter or a translator, right? I think that a lot of the times there might be this fear of like, well, if I ask for something, then I'm not going to get the care that I need. And I think that can be very reflective in terms of like just the community as a whole, right? That because we're undocumented immigrants, that we aren't that we shouldn't be allowed to ask for things that need to be in place to provide more inclusive care. So I think that his story and what you mentioned is still very much true in healthcare. I think sometimes there are good intentions, and I think also a lot of our communities, there's a lot of mistrust that happens, right? So bringing in a family member into an appointment or whatnot is part of the cultural practice that exists. So I think being mindful of like just the different, the pros of bringing in family members, but how to just be mindful and use different services to accommodate, I think.
We have another question? Yes, we have a question back there. Here comes the mic.
I'd like to ask the young woman who's a high school student how you help other undocumented high school students to cope with what must be the extreme level of anxiety now with our new administration in Washington.
So because I'm part of the Dream Club, we do a lot of workshops, and we're in the beginning of the year, it's a whole Saturday where we had workshops done by students for students, and it was all different kind of workshops, and one was the emotional well-being during these times. There's one like know your rights and how to be an activist and all of these things, but all of it really comes down to the Dream Club and being there feels really safe and really helps cope on the days, cope with your emotions nowadays.
Does anybody want to address if life feels different for you in terms of greater anxiety since President Trump? Is it, I mean, how is it, if it's changing any of the things you normally would do, what are they? Orlando, you were nodding.
Yes, definitely. And specifically with DACA, a lot of things changed with that. There's an uncertainty whether or not that program is going to continue to exist. Immediately when he was elected president, it was like one of my nightmares was coming true. You know, everyone always said that, don't worry, this program is going to be around. You're going to be benefiting this for a while now. But with that, it was just like a new fear, like to add on to everything else that was happening. And also parts of DACA that we should be allowed to use, we can't use because of the fear of not being able to come back to this country, like advanced parole. My grandfather passed away last week, actually, and I was supposed to have that right to go visit him with advanced parole, but if I went, I wouldn't be able to come back, and you know, I chose to stay.
I mean, for me, when he got elected, I cried. I mean, I just cried because I knew that my future was going to be in limbo, especially not knowing whether DACA was going to continue or be taken away. And I just think of the worst, you know, whenever you just hear in the media about, you know, what the new president thinks of DACA. And I just kept reading about it, and I heard NPR quite a lot. But I had to put a stop to that after a while because your anxiety just increases. And I teach, and I cannot bring that to the classroom. So I just had to find a way to, when's a good time for me to read about what's going on, and then when can I turn things off and and then continue with my life, because it can really just be very overwhelming and take over your entire, like, your thoughts.
And I think the climate is different in like different places of the country also. There was a teacher who spoke to me a couple weeks ago. She's in Texas, and she's saying, what can we do to help the parents not be afraid to bring their kids to school? So that's also like something that dramatically changed after this person was elected. Parents are now afraid of driving their kids to school. They're no longer seeking medical help because they're afraid that they're going to be deported, that the clinic is going to call ICE on them. And it apparently, I spoke to my friend last night, and a woman in Texas, that happened. The people within the office called ICE, and this woman was deported and wasn't able to go back home after that. So I think that's something that we all live with, and it's like and it's changing a lot across the country. And I think even as a resident, like I have fear, especially with what happened with the refugees and people from like the Middle East who couldn't come back into the country, even though they had citizenship and residency, because there was just like this whole chaotic blur of like, well, who can come back and who can't come back. And I think that goes to your point of, even though you had that right to go back to Mexico and come back like okay with DACA, he didn't go, because if he wakes up tomorrow or like right now in an hour says like it's over, and whoever's outside of the country with advanced parole, whether it's for education, humanitarian reasons, or for work, they can't come back.
And yeah, just to add to whatever everyone else is saying, my family and I have talked about a safety plan. So in terms of like if we don't hear for a couple of hours or from a couple of days from somebody, like what are some steps to kind of take to ensure that we're all looking out for each other, that we're contacting our immigration attorneys or any other service providers that we need to. So we've actually kind of have been working on drafting like a sheet. I live in a mixed status family where people have different immigration statuses. So being just knowledgeable about that and having those conversations, I think for my family has been something that we've incorporated. And I think that speaks to the level of fear, right, that we have been experiencing, or at least my family, in terms of like, you know, you just never know. It could be a stop, right, getting stopped for driving or whatnot. And that this has happened in the country. Like, this has been happening in the country for, like, a long time, right? It's just now becoming so much more apparent because of the media is covering it and it's emphasizing it. But this is definitely a fear that has existed in our communities for a really long time. It's just definitely now so much more powerful and in our faces because of the current political climate.
There we have a, oh, we'll just get to you also, and then we're getting close to ending.
I need your help. If you are under the DACA status, what are the roads to citizenship if there is a path?
Right now, there's none. It's just so DACA just gives you a work permit to work for 2 years, and after 2 years you have to renew it, and that's all you get. You don't. There's no path to residency, no path to citizenship. And each time that you renew your application, you get your fingerprints, so they check your background again. So that's why for me, if they were to take it away, I just don't get it. Like, how much do you want from us to show you that we do our taxes and we do all these different things that everyone does? So if people take it away from us, like it doesn't make sense.
Hi, thank you so much, not only for sharing, but for trusting us with your stories. I really appreciate that. You're all so wonderfully articulate. That's just a delight. But my question is, how can we help you the most? So we are a supportive community, but we don't know what to do either. Are there ways that you can think, you're all extremely bright, are there ways that you can think of that your community around you and people like us can be of more specific help to you?
So I think right now with the power of social media, right, like there's a lot of power to it. And when I go to sites of like, oh, who's supporting immigrants or who's supporting dreamers, I don't see faces like yours. So I think that's the ask that I've been doing in these past couple months. Like, we need your faces to be on video, not just on articles, right? Because like, yeah, the last name and the name, you could probably think that the person is not Latina or Latino, but we need your face to say that you support us and why you support us. Why are you here today? Because the country needs to hear that, right? And so that us as people on this side, we know that it's not just people that have our skin color are on this side, that you guys are also on our side.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I definitely want to echo what you're saying. And I think that's really important. I think it's doing some self-reflection and looking at like, well, what areas of my life do I have privilege in, right? And being able to utilize that and channeling that out into the community. So if it's your skin color, if it's the ability to be able to speak various languages, if it's the fact that you are a citizen, or whatever that privilege looks like, it's in my mind, for me as a U visa holder, as somebody who has that, I'm now using that privilege to be able to talk about this and continue to advocate for social justice and equality for all. So I think that would be something that I would recommend, and it takes work, but I think just by you being here and being open also to our stories and asking questions, and I think being just also vulnerable and recognizing like, maybe I don't know what to do, right? Mm-hmm. I think is a huge step forward. Mm-hmm.
Yes. I think I've been asked this question various times, and it's in the events where I go to speak about my story. Like just last week I went to a Stanford dialogue, and there were some Stanford students who were asking the Sequoia Dreamers question of like, how can we be more involved and stuff like this. It's like finding events like these and finding how to integrate yourself into these sort of communities is where you can really support us, because I'm always very surprised by how many people, and delighted about how many people are in support of people like me, and it really helps emotionally, and yeah, just Sometimes even I don't know how to help us. And I go to events. And my peers ask me, why are you doing this? Why are you even doing so much? And we live in Redwood City. There's nothing, going on for you here. And sometimes I don't know either. I don't know why I'm doing all of this. I don't know why can't I just go home and do my homework, because, there's so much to do.
And I think also voting for the right policies that support immigrants. You're all citizens, or even creating policy, right? Like whether that's like us coming together, creating a policy that's in the benefit of dreamers and immigrants all across the country, because it's not just Mexicanos who are immigrants. And then having you guys push that, right? And have it not just be on the ballot, but actually go and vote for it. And try to convince people who aren't for it to be for it, right? Because that's something that I also did in the past couple months. I spoke to a very conservative, like Republican man who was like, no, I want to build the wall and it needs to be built. And I sat with him at dinner and I told him my story. And at the end of our conversation, he's like, we need to build a bridge. And I said, yes, we do. So I think it's that, like, don't be afraid to speak to your family, your friends, your neighbors, of people like us and stories like ours, and why we should have that opportunity and to belong, right? And to be even more of contributors, because I feel like we already contribute a ton to this country that we see as our home, but not on paper, right? They don't allow us to contribute on paper, like legally. So I think that's another big ask that I have of you guys.
So I just want to say that each of your stories reflects your beauty. And each one of those stories is a seed, because you guys all gave up a sunny Sunday afternoon after a very rainy season. And so in doing it, you took a major step to spread the story. The videos are going to travel. We've talked to legislators that expect little clips that they might use in their social media, and we'll figure out more and more ways to have the stories travel. But the stories do work their way into people's hearts. And so if you repeat one of them to somebody tomorrow, you're doing great work. So I want to thank you all, and I want all of you to eat something before you leave. The storytellers will be around for a little while, and so we can all just share some food and be regular folks. And then go out. And before I stop, I do want to say all of our camera people and about 5 people in the control room and all the people who set up the food are volunteers. Yeah. And that they gave up a Sunday afternoon as well, and we really appreciate it. And I guess let's just go out and fulfill some dreams. Thank you very much.